I want to now introduce Rob Greenfield. So he's an adventurer, environmental activist, humanitarian, and as he says, a dude making a difference. Dedicated to leading the way to more sustainable. He's the creator of the Food Waste Fiasco, which is a campaign to end food waste. He dove into 2,000 dumpsters. Any of you been there? No. So across the U.S. to expose nearly half of all the food in the U.S. is wasted, while 1 in 7 Americans obviously are food insecure. So Rob, come on out.
All right. Hey, everyone. Nice to be here with you all today. So some of you may know me as the guy who's dived into thousands of dumpsters to raise awareness about how much perfectly good food is going to waste. Some of you may know me as the guy who's traveled to a far-off country with no money, with just the clothes on my back and my passport, on a mission to make it home on the kindness of others and show the world that people are good. Or as the trash man from a project where I spent a month in New York City living like the average American, wearing every piece of trash that I generated to create a visual of how much garbage we make in just 1 month. Or the guy who has just 111 possessions to his name. Or maybe the guy who lived in an off-the-grid 50-square-foot tiny house. So I do a lot of very extreme adventures and environmental activism campaigns. And the idea is to get people to stop and think about really important environmental and social issues. But what most of you probably don't know is that I haven't always been this way. I haven't always had a desire to have a positive impact on the world or to be the change that I wish to see. So if we rewind about 10 years, this is me during college. And if you don't know what this is a duck bong. So it's like a beer bong, except it's an ornamental plastic lawn duck. You cut a hole in the beak and the foot off, and you fill it up with about 5 beers. The most efficient way to drink 5 beers as you can imagine. So I was very passionate about partying, women, material possessions, and money. I had a part-time job during college, and that was pursuing women, but when I wasn't successful, I ran into things like unlucky Christmas trees. Every Sunday I spent about 2 hours shining my car, and my goal was to be a millionaire by the time that I was 30 years old. Now, during this time, I actually thought I was doing pretty good for the environment. I was the one who was recycling the beer cans and the beer bottles after all of our parties. I was the one who would yell at my roommate Ricky for leaving the faucet on while he was brushing his teeth. So I thought I was doing pretty good. But after college, something happened, and I realized I had to totally transform my life. And this is the part of the story where I'm supposed to tell you about some sort of near-death experience, a moment of enlightenment, some sort of like, aha moment. But I actually didn't have anything like that. I just simply started to watch a lot of documentaries and read a lot of books and realized that all of my little daily actions were causing destruction to the world around me, to all the things that I loved. People, animals, and the earth. The gasoline that I was pumping into my car was a part of the routine 10,000 oil spills that happened per year. The food I was eating was coming from factory farms. The trash I was making was being sent to landfills where it would emit greenhouse gases from above and a toxic sludge from below. And the cheap crap that I was buying, well, people were working halfway around the world in horrible conditions to bring that to me. And so I realized, I wasn't a part of the solution very much at all. I was basically the problem. And at that point, I could have felt, total doom and gloom, totally helpless and hopeless. Like, what can I possibly do now? I'm 1 in 7 billion. But instead, I actually felt really empowered because now I knew the problems, and now I knew the solutions. So what I did is I made a long list of changes that I wanted to make. And I hung it right up in my kitchen, right where I'd see it every day. And my goal was to just make one positive change a week to change my life. And I started with small things, like carrying a reusable grocery bag and bringing that to the grocery store, or starting to ride a bicycle more and drive the car less, starting to shop at the local farmers market and support local businesses rather than the big chain stores, and starting to stop eating the junky processed packaged foods and instead a more plant-based whole food diet. And what happened was the more I made these positive changes in my life for the environment, the more I realized that they were positive for myself as well. And I was becoming a lot happier and a lot healthier. Of course, less duck bongs didn't hurt at all in that area as well. And so after about 2 years of making positive changes, I had made over 100 positive changes at just one per week. And so at that point, I really learned a valuable lesson, and that's that great change doesn't happen overnight. It starts with one small change, and then another, and each change is basically a building block in the foundation towards a more environmentally friendly and socially just life. And those things that in the past seemed like giant, unachievable leaps forward were now just one small step forward. So I really started to feel like I was becoming the change that I wanted to see in the world. I was leading by example, but I felt like I really needed to do more with the state of the world we're in. I felt like I needed to not just lead by example, but really live it out loud and inspire more people to make positive changes. But at this time, I didn't have a single follower on social media. I had no website. No media was covering what I was doing. So I had to come up with a crazy idea. I was going to bike across the United States on a bamboo bicycle and have no impact whatsoever. And by doing that, I'd be able to live sustainability to the extreme while being able to bring it to as many people as possible. So I had to set rules for all the aspects of sustainable living, the things that we deal with every day: food, water, energy, waste, and transportation. For food, the rule was I could only eat local, organic, unpackaged food, which basically meant almost nothing that you would get at a typical grocery store. And in California, I did all right. But after I got out of California, I quickly realized there's food deserts that exist all across the United States. So I had made one exception, and that was that I could go dumpster diving. I figured if the food was in the dumpsters and going to waste, I might as well eat it. But most of you, the way you might feel now thinking about eating food from the garbage, that's how I felt at first. I was worried about my ego. I was worried what people might think about me. So I timidly climbed up to the dumpster. I looked inside, and sure enough, there was food in there. So I hopped in, and the first thing that I ever ate was a still frozen half-gallon of ice cream. And I didn't have a spoon with me that day, so I just dug right into my sunglasses, and that was the beginning of my dumpster diving experience. From that point on, dumpster after dumpster after dumpster was filled with perfectly good food. But there was a girl that I was very much in love with back in San Diego, and I talked to her on the phone, and she told me, "Whatever you do, don't tell anybody that you're dumpster diving." So I listened for a little while, but we'll get back to that at the end. So for water, I couldn't use any water from on the grid. No turning on a faucet, taking a shower, using a flush toilet, any of the ways that we're used to using water on a daily basis. Instead, I purified it from lakes and rivers or drank rainwater. And for electricity, I couldn't use any electricity from on the grid either. So no turning on a light switch, no plugging into an outlet, no using the air conditioning or a fan on a hot night. And it came down to even things like if I wanted to go into a store and they only had automatic doors, I had to wait till someone else walked in and then hop in behind them. And by stripping my life back to the basics, I was able to start to deeply understand how electrified my life was and how I was actually using resources and affecting the world around me through all my little daily actions. For trash, the rule was I had to carry every piece of garbage that I created all the way across the country with me. So if I had, say, a granola bar in Nevada, I had to carry that wrapper all the way to Vermont with me. And in an entire summer, I created just 2 pounds of trash that you see here, which is what the average person in the United States makes by about 1 o'clock in the afternoon on any given day. And of course, for transportation, I couldn't use any fossil fuels to cross the country whatsoever. So biking the entire way, even on the off days. And as you can imagine, by really living sustainability to the extreme for an entire summer, for 104 days, it really ingrained it into my lifestyle, into my philosophy, and into my actions. So when I got back to San Diego, I was still making positive changes in my life, but I found that being back in my apartment, I was consuming more resources than I wanted to. I would leave the water on or the electricity on because it was seemingly infinite. So I decided I wanted to do what I did on the bike ride and do it at home instead. And how I decided I was going to do that was to live in a little tiny house off the grid in San Diego. So to give you an idea of how small it was 5 feet wide, so not quite wide enough for me to extend my arms out, 10 feet long, so not quite 2 of me long, and about a little bit not quite tall enough for me to stand in. So it was pretty small, but I thought, I like to do extreme things. This would be a good way to get people to think about the size of their houses, so I'll go for it. And at the tiny house, I lived off the grid, so all my water came from harvesting rainwater. And a lot of people would think that might be impossible to live just off rainwater, let alone in San Diego, which is sort of a desert, and let alone in a mega drought, which California was in at the time. But one of the really important things that I've learned is that everything in life is a matter of perspective. No matter what issues you're working on, everything is a matter of perspective. So the average American uses about 80 to 100 gallons of water per day. The average European uses about 50 gallons of water per day. And the average person in sub-Saharan Africa uses 2 to 5 gallons of water per day. So to the American, it's crazy how little is used over in Africa. And to the person in Africa, it's crazy how much is used over here. And so what I started to realize is once I changed my perspective, I could really start to change the world around me overnight. At the tiny house, all of my electricity came from these little solar panels. And another really important thing that I've learned is that sustainable living is also a spectrum. So you can look at the really expensive $90,000 electric vehicles or the giant solar panels and think that's only available to the wealthy. The way that I was able to really live sustainably was by simplifying my life and needing less. And when you do it that way, it becomes accessible to a larger number of people. Now, if you had asked me, the guy doing the duck bongs and chasing all the women in sight, what I'd be doing in 5 years, I definitely would not have said this. I would not have thought that I would be pooping in a 5-gallon bucket and composting my own poop. But one of the really important things that I learned is that everything that's really convenient, everything that's really easy in life, what that usually means is that the burden has been outsourced elsewhere. So, talk about easy. You go in the toilet, you hit that lever, poop is out of sight, out of mind, you never have to think about it again. It becomes someone else's problem. Whereas with the compost toilet, I actually had to do the work, but instead of creating a waste product that caused problems, it created a valuable resource that could be used to grow food. So I could talk about poop for about 10 minutes, but we don't have time for that, so we'll move on. At the tiny house, this is the amount of trash that I would create in a month, so more than on the bike ride, but still about 30 times less than the average person. And so, as you can see, I like to take things to the extreme. I like to do extreme things to get us to really start to self-reflect on our own lives and think about what we can do with our own actions to have a positive impact on the world around us. But when I first started to do all of this, I was pretty worried what people would think about me. My ego, would it take a hit? And I was pretty worried. So you remember that at the beginning, I mentioned that one girl who told me not to tell anybody that I was dumpster diving. Well, here we are, hosting a food waste fiasco together. We've now been together for 2.5 years. And so this is proof that you can eat the trash and have the girl too. But seriously, the most important thing that I've ever learned, if you want to affect change in the world, is to drop social norms, stop worrying what people think about you, and just do what you know is right for the earth, for your community, and yourself. And speaking of not worrying about what people think about you, imagine wearing all the trash that you create around New York City for an entire month. Yeah, so, I've always believed that everyone in this room, that every one of us as individuals can truly have a positive impact on the world around us through all of our daily actions. When people say, does it really matter? I've always been the first one to say it does matter. But never did I feel it as strong as the day that I was sitting here in Union Square on the last day, covered in 30 days of trash, thinking to myself, this is how much trash one of us makes in a month. Now imagine a year. Now imagine 10 years. Now imagine a lifetime. In one lifetime, you can create a mountain worth of trash or no mountain of trash to leave behind for future generations at all. Proof that our little daily actions really do matter and do add up. So the point of all this isn't to get you to run out of here and dive into every dumpster you see or wear all of your trash for a month or bike across the country or any of those things. You can do those if you want to. But the point is, what can we do as individuals to have a positive impact on the world around us through all of our daily actions? So I have a little challenge for you. Think of just one positive change that you can make in your lives. Just one. Write that down on a piece of paper before leaving here today, and then take that home, hang it up in your kitchen, or wherever you'll see it every day, and then make that change. And once you've made that one, make another, and then another, and then another, until you become the change that you wish to see in the world. Thank you, and enjoy.